What's up guys, Halo Repository back today with another video. So if you are watching this, this is going to be a spoiler discussion of Waypoint Chronicles. So if you don't want spoilers, definitely go watch my spoiler-free video, which I'll have a link down below. Now, just as a general note, if you have watched my spoiler-free video, the first section of this video is going to be that exact same video, but when I start talking about the 10 exclusive stories to the physical release of this book, that's where this video will change. So if you've seen that part, I'm going to leave a little time digit right here where you could skip to see the spoiler part of this video and not just basically the rehash of that spoiler-free video. Now, if you are here for the first time, you can watch my entire intro where I just talk about the books, you know, the authors, my overall thoughts and feelings about the book, as well as, you know, other stuff. But if you're just here to get the spoilers, then you can also use that timestamp to skip there and listen to those. So hope you enjoy. A majority of this book has already been released. The first one, which is known as Vertical Umbrage, came out in November of 2022, already almost 4 years ago. And since then, we've seen a steady release of Waypoint Chronicles stories over the past few years that have really just, you know, built up the events of this book. And they range from anywhere from Halo 4 to Ancient Humanity to the Flood's presence throughout the galaxy, and of course just building off of Halo Infinite as well. Needless to say, Halo Waypoint Chronicles continues where Halo Evolutions and Fractures left off. These three books, including Halo Tales from Slipspace, do pretty much what they are setting out to do, expanding the story of the ever-growing universe of Halo, while also making sure not to really, you know, step on the toes of what's to come next. In this book in particular, you have over 35 short stories. So that's going to be just mostly just stories that talk about different events throughout the Halo universe. You also have over 21 armor infiniums and of course 35 intel drops. Now what these are intel drops. Basically just add to the story you might have just read, you know, just extra little bits. These aren't things that are actually like exclusive to the book or have never before been seen. They are in fact things that have been released alongside Halo Infinite's many seasonal updates throughout these past years. Likewise, armor infiniums are cool. They're essentially talking about specific weapons that we've seen in like the Halo Infinite campaign, like the Pinpoint Needler, Eshrum's weapon, the Blood Blade, all those types of things. And what these little basically like intel drops do are not really talk about the weapon itself, like this is the schematics, this is when it was built, this is who built and all that type of stuff, but more of their significance, their backstory, who owned them, how did they get them, did they win them, did they steal them, did they kill for them, and like just overall giving you a better sense of that weapon while also building the lore of who had them. Overall, this book is jam-packed with lore with a total of 588 pages. And what's really cool about this book is I can recommend reading it in so many different ways because there are currently so many ways you can read it. The first and the more, you know, obvious answer is to, when you go out and buy it, is to pick up a copy of the book. I will say that even though we've seen this cover, because I did a whole video on the cover, which is why I'm not going to talk about it in length like I would for my normal videos. If you want to see me talk about it, I will leave a link to that video from a year ago in the description. But what I will say though is, even though I've seen this cover for the past year, it's been saved on my phone since then, something about it actually being on like the physical copy is super appeasing to the eye. I often found myself just like always glancing at it, always being captured by it. I don't know if it's just like the overall color or just the design itself. I think for whatever reason is, even though I've seen this for a year, I thought it was cool, I liked it, I was excited, but actually having it in my hand and seeing it, it's insane. Plus, like I said, she's thick. The second way to engage with these is, like I said, most of the stories in this book have been released over the years on HaloWaypoint.com, YouTube. Basically, you can either read it in some sort of PDF form or the post on Waypoint Chronicles, or if you go to YouTube, you can listen to most of them by, you know, one of the authors, Alexander Wakeford, who narrated pretty much all of them and did phenomenal in my opinion. I think you could definitely tell Alex was the author on many of these stories because he just evokes the emotions that, you know, as an author you would want the reader to experience in these. So honestly, I would also recommend that. That's pretty much how I've been gearing up for this review. Basically, what I've done is I haven't read a majority of the book, and the reason why is because I've been listening to a majority of the book, and then just reading through the different Armor Infiniums intel, and then of course the 10 exclusive stories that were only specific to the physical copy, but will be in audio version later down the road. Okay, I should scratch that. Not later down the road. They should be out today when the book releases with the audio book. We'll get to that in just a moment. The other channel that is also doing basically drama versions of readings of these books is known as Jumperscape, and in fact, they're doing a special 25th anniversary Waypoint Chronicles story sometime this year alongside Halo. So that's gonna be super exciting, super interesting. I've given them a listen to for like a couple of them, and they're really good. There's a lot of attention to detail. Just the overall sound quality, the design, just all of it is just superb, especially Duality, which was one of my favorite stories in this. It's so good. You guys did so good on that. And the last way you can engage with this, and I think is probably one of the coolest way you can engage with this, is through the audio version. And the reason why, and what I mean by audio version is I mean the official full-on book, not the different excerpts that have been released through YouTube, but the full audio reading of this book. And the reason why is because since this book has a lot of different characters, from Veronica Dare to Thomas Lasky to Joy Hughes to Cortana. Actually, yeah, Joy Hughes should be in it. Don't quote me on that. But what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of major characters are in this book, and so to give a love letter to Halo fans, HaloStudios has gotten pretty much almost all the people who are in this book. Veronica Dare, Cortana, Halsey, Jen Taylor, of course, Darren O'Hare, who voices Lasky, the woman who voiced Isabella in Halo Wars 2. All these voice actors who have had some sort of small impact in the Halo franchise have come back to reprise their respective roles and basically give readings to their characters in these books, such as Jerome 092, Captain Cutter, High Auxiliary Sloan. Needless to say, it's a divine treat for a lot of Halo fans, specifically me, because I love Darren O'Hare, I love Thomas Lasky, so for him coming back to read Axios, which is a story about Thomas Lasky, just fills me with so much excitement that I just cannot wait to hear Lasky's voice once again. And for the love of God, Halo, if he's not in Halo 7 alongside Darren O'Hare, I'm gonna play it, but I'm canceling it. But what also really truly makes the audible version or the audio version of this book special isn't just that they got a lot of the original voice actors back, but that they're bringing in community members as well. Content creators such as my two favorites, Hidden Xperia and Installation 00, will be doing readings of 2 different stories from this book. That is phenomenal because these are 2 guys who I watch probably on the daily, listen to their videos, and they do such phenomenal jobs with their content that it's so cool to have them basically be a voice within the Halo franchise reading these books. And on one side note, I really wish one of my favorite YouTube channels, Halo YouTube channels I should say, growing up was Halo Canon. And even though they don't make videos anymore, I really wish that HaloStudios could have gotten them back for at least one story in this, because I think that would have been chef's kiss. Likewise to say, there is a multitude of ways for you as a fan to enjoy these stories, and I think that a lot of people who are into that deeper lore are in for a huge treat with this book. That then brings me, of course, to the actual book. This book was written by Jeff Easterling and Alexander Wakeford, who are 2 of the franchise writers over at HaloStudios, so that means they know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They have been involved in depth with the Halo stories for a long time. It's not like with an author where they're just given a script, some bullet points, here's our expectations, go write something. These are 2 guys who are embroiled in Halo lore and stories that you can see it in this book. You can see all the different tidbits of different aspects of the lore weaving into certain stories, even if it's super minute to super major. And fun fact, a lot of the stories in this weave in together. It could be major, it could be big, like I said, but it's just so cool when you're reading one short story and then you're like, hey, that just got mentioned in another short story. It's a lot of good fun. I think it's done phenomenally well, and I think a lot of lore fans are gonna love it. Now, like I said, this book does really well at expanding lore, but doesn't extend it. And what I mean by that is, this isn't a spoiler, because honestly, it should be expected. It's given our history with fractures and evolutions. If you're going into this book hoping that it has major lore reveals for anything post Halo Infinite and Edge of Dawn, you're going to be disappointed. Now, I won't say that, there's anything wrong with that. And in fact, I will say there are certain aspects of this book that can set up stuff that could be, shown more in a future Halo game. I don't know if they will, because it is a lot of stuff in here, plus Edge of Dawn. I feel like that if we expect everything from Edge of Dawn, from Infinite, from this book, and any other book that releases between here and Halo 7, that it somehow has a major implication for Halo 7, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So for me, it's like, there's a lot of great lore bits that could be talked about in the next game, but I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, they mentioned this in Waypoint Chronicles, therefore it will be in Halo 7. That just wouldn't make sense. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get excited for what you read in this book, because a lot of the stories are super interesting. It brings in characters that I love, characters that are becoming more major proponents within the actual games themselves, such as Halo Infinite and probably Halo 7, that I think that even if they don't get a full-fledged story or slot within Halo 7, it sets up more stories for books. Okay, so now, once again, if you are here, this is where spoilers begin. I will be talking about these 10 unreleased stories that were exclusive purely to this book's actual release, which is today, May 26th. So if you don't want spoilers, get out of here. Now, this is going to be just a little bit difficult because some of these stories are super quick and super efficient for me just to talk about, while some of them are jam-packed with lore and stories, and of course, I'm going to want to give you my spiel. So I'm going to try to the best of my ability to be as precise and as quick as I can, because I don't want you to sit here and watch a 4-hour long video. There is one story in here that I'm going to talk briefly about, but I'm thinking of making a whole video for it because it is the longest story in this book. And there's so much that I want to talk about that I cannot do in this short amount of time that I'm trying to make this video. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, so this first short story is called Rendezvous with Ramen. It takes place in August of 2558, and it's essentially Oni looking, well, it doesn't really say, yeah, it's Oni. It's Oni looking at an excerpt of a renowned chef known as Arturo Bustamante's book. In this book, Bustamante is trying to find the world's, or the galaxy's, greatest ramen. And at first you're thinking, what does that have to do? Why should I care? But what's important about this is Bustamante ends up exploring an alien refugee camp on Earth. And he goes into this area where he meets with a normal human who lives in this refugee camp. He started a church and all that. His name is Father Barbosa, and Barbosa knows the district well. He's engaged with the aliens who live here, and he likes them. But it's also a problem because there's people who, of course, do not like any of the aliens for obvious reasons. We were at war with them for 30 years. Clearly, we're going to have issues. Either way, Bustamante and Father Barbosa go to this Sanghili restaurant. Because again, the whole purpose of Bustamante's book is to find the best ramen. So hey, why not try out an alien restaurant that's here on Earth? And when they get to this restaurant, it's so funny because they meet up with an elite who just goes by the name Peter. And what I really like about this short story is because when you meet with Peter, Peter tells his story of how he's here. And not just him, but other members of the Covenant. How are they here and why are they still here? And why are they going by such, human names and just doing something so basic as starting a restaurant? Because, grunts work here as well. And what we learned from Peter is that he was aboard the ship Day of Jubilation, which was one of the ships that had attacked Earth during the events of Halo 2's beginning. And in fact, it was the ship that Chief was giving the Covenant back their bomb to. Peter and a few of his Sanghili had, been able to get off the ship prior to Chief bombing it, and they made their way down to Earth, fought humanity, up until the point that they saw Regret's ship exit. and leave Earth to go to, Delta Halo. And so what we see is Peter talking about how after that moment, him and his elites realized they were kind of screwed. And in fact, it's also around the time when the brutes betrayed the elites and started hunting down elites. So now you have it to where these elites came to Earth. They expected that this was going to be a triumphant day. But in reality, it turned to hell. Not only are they now on a hostile world, because it's Earth, humanity's homeworld, they're also being hunted down by the species they once called, well, not allies, because, they hated each other, but close enough, right? So Peter talks about how him and his Sangheili ran and hid to the best of their ability. He knew it was dishonorable, but it was the only thing that they could do. Eventually, they were captured by Oni. They were, of course, interrogated, but eventually, after they told them everything, because, at this point, you've been betrayed, what else are you going to do? Oni let them go. In fact, they allowed them to start refugee camps here on the planet. And so, yeah, they were granted clemency. They were allowed to start their own little refugee camp here on Earth. Peter's now been living here for the past 6 years. And, after that, Arturo leaves and, he tries the ramen that they make. It isn't great because they don't even know what ramen is. He gives them the recipe, they make it, and he's like, yeah, it's fine. He leaves and says, maybe this is something we look into later. And that's where the excerpt of the book ends. Now, we kind of skip back to where we have an Oni agent recommending that at a professional level, it's probably wise that they have Arturo remove this portion of the book because they're still having problems with, humans not being okay with refugees on Earth. But at the same time, he also thinks that maybe it's time just to let people figure out for themselves and stop being so panicky about it. And he says maybe, honestly, just leave it in the book. Ultimately, it's the higher-ups' call, but that's just my own personal opinion. And that's pretty much Rendezvous with Ramen. And what I do like about this book that I said in my spoiler-free is that this short story answers a question I didn't know I had. What does happen to, all the elites and other members of the Covenant that had survived the events of Halo 2 on Earth? And so I'm a little intrigued to see what could happen in the future with this. I don't really know if anything will, especially if we just focus on people like Peter. But I'd be willing to have maybe a short story like Smoke and Shadows length book where it talks about those events, or maybe have them be brought up in another future Halo book. It's interesting. And I thought, you know what? Thanks for answering that question. I don't care about the ramen though. Okay, so this one is where it's hard for me to really talk about because it is very much lore heavy. This one is known as Ghosts of Gyre, or Ghosts of the Gyre. If you don't know what a Gyre is, and also if you've watched my spoiler-free video, yes, I am well aware I mispronounced Gyre. I won't lie to you. Before Halo, I've never seen the word, all right? Until I listened to the audio version and they said Gyre, I was like, all right, I'm wrong, my bad. But if you don't know what a Gyre is, it's what we would originally call the original Halo array, the big hula hoops, before we got installation 1 through 7. And the specific Gyre that they are on is Gyre 11, which ends up becoming installation 07, aka Zeta Halo. Now, to briefly discuss this, I will say that it quotes 343 Guilty Spark, but from Halo Primordium. And then the rest of the book reads almost exactly like Primordium. And that's good and bad. It's good because Primordium, I think, is probably one of the most lore-heavy books, and not just the Forerunner Saga, but in the Halo books. Quite frankly, it is one of my favorites, but I do agree with most of the consensus that it is a tough and grueling read, but I do think it's relatively rewarding. And that's how I kind of felt with this one. So I'll say once again, out of every short story in this book, it's both the longest in terms of page number and audio version. The audio version itself is 1 hour and 15 minutes long. And that may not sound like long for an audio book, but when you look at the other short stories in here, they're all roughly 30 to 40 minutes. So you're adding another half an hour on top of that, plus the amount of lore that's in it, plus the fact that it feels like Primordium. It's dense and it's a lot. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you basically a basic rundown of the story, but then I think I'm gonna make a separate video talking about Ghosts of the Gyre, so I can really talk about all those minute details that I'm certainly going to have to glance over for the purpose of time on this video. So here we go. So the Ghost of the Gyre starts off with a internal dialogue from Adjutant Vigilance. Now that name doesn't sound like anything, it just sounds like one of the many sub-monitors on Zeta Halo. But here's the thing, Adjutant Vigilance isn't just any monitor. We discovered that it's Genominer Folder of Fortune, who was a life shaper who we met in Primordium. And Genominer kind of goes over like the details of how he got here. You know, he was once a normal life shaper who was caretaking for humans on Gyre 11, aka Zeta Halo, back when it was part of the original array. The Master Builder wanted to take control and started making people decide, like, are you with me or are you against me? Then the Librarian said, protect the humans, do what you have to do. As a matter of fact, you know, preserve them in digital essence. And so basically, in a way, Genominer composed the humans that he was charged with. And these are like, not the ancient humans, but the other ancient humans that were devolved into, like, you know, cave people, basically. So he did that. He digitized them and he kept their essence while their physical forms were killed. And he did the same thing, becoming a monitor. Now, if you don't remember from Halo Primordium, this is the scene where, you know, Chacus, Gamelpar, and Venevra meet up with a group of humans. And they're, you know, I think her name was Maria, the weird, I cannot remember the name, Gigantopithecus, where they meet that group of humans though. And at first things seem great. You know, they have food, they have water, it's humans. It's the most normal part of this ring world. But then we find out that none of the humans are physically there. In fact, they're all projections by other monitors. And we've seen this type of technology, not in just Primordium, but even in Edge of Dawn, when Chief gets to Lifeworker Central and finds those Oni scientists that had somehow been digitized and now are projected by another monitor and are trapped in this building. It's the same type of thing. So then Genominer goes on, talks about, hey, like, yeah, I digitized myself. I now stay on guard. I shrouded my area. I camouflaged it on Zeta Halo. And it's been this way ever since. So obviously this section of the ring survived both the destruction from the, you know, the wolfed planet and the reconstruction into, you know, Zeta Halo. We then change perspectives over to a group of humans that are here in 2553 or 54, I believe. I'll get the date right here on the screen for you, where basically they are just exploring Zeta Halo. They run into a pack of the rhinos, the space rhinos we see from the Slipspace demo that we saw way back in 2018 as our first reveal for Halo Infinite. They follow these little rhino packs until they come across an area that is showing up as, like, there's a slight distortion. And that's when they recognize, hey, something is being hidden here. Let's go inside and figure out what that is. They do go inside and they find, like, think of the Delta Halo ruins, like these stone ruins that Chief and, you know, you basically the first thing you see when you land on Delta Halo. They find something almost exactly like that. But not only that, but they find a weird orb that when they look into it, they're mesmerized. They're pulled in. They're seeing memories that, like, they've had all their life. But then, kind of like, and I'm not trying to connect dots here, but I'm just trying to, like, build a picture for you. Kind of like when Captain Keyes in the Flood, spoiler alert, had been taken by the Flood, you know, he would have a memory and then it was gone. This is almost doing the exact same thing. This weird orb looks into your brain, you see the memory. For example, she sees being on the beach, and now that memory's gone. And then we fast forward through time, and we learn throughout the years that these humans are trapped here because they are pulled in by this orb, and they continuously look into it, and they continuously lose their memories. And while this is happening, Genominer is talking about just things that are going on in the ring, and then talking about, you know, was the Librarian right or wrong for leaving a gene song in humans, basically writing out instructions of how their genes would play out to create things like what the Librarian said in Halo 4. You know, Chief, Cortana, the Mjolnir armor were all planted in seeds through genes and through time and all that kind of stuff. Genominer kind of reflects on that, like, is that the right thing to do? Because aren't we supposed to allow the humans to determine life for themselves rather than be involved? Isn't that the problem that we had, is we were too involved? And so Genominer wonders, on one end, did she do it on purpose, basically contradicting ourselves, saying that we should no longer interfere with the galaxy? Or did the librarian do that on purpose so that way they, humans, would rebel against their gene song and become better than the foreigners? It's a really interesting question, but one that's not answered here, especially when you consider that it never really strictly says, and maybe it does, again, this is where it's confusing, but vigilance, I believe, happens to continuously show up to these humans in this shrouded area, but they don't perceive her as vigilance. Not her, him, but they perceive him as Salamander, this weird god-like being to these group of humans, because the more they look into this orb, the more memories they lose, and the more they become like the cave version of themselves. It's almost like they're being de-evolved once again. And our main character never kind of gets to the point where she recognizes that her and her companions are losing their memories and are trapped in this space. So she stops looking into the sphere, recognizing that it's only going to cause more problems. But her companions don't. They continue to look into it and continue to lose those memories and become more praiseworthy of Salamander and these other monitors. But again, they're not perceiving them as Forerunner AIs. They're perceiving them as something else. Either way, this girl, our main character, goes and decides to try and do more exploration, figuring out what's in this weird little hole that is near their area, where realistically it's like a cave, but also try to find a way to get out of here. And while this is happening though, she's having kind of like what Gamapar and Venevra and Chakas all have. The old memories, their gene song, their geshes of ancient humanity are awakening within them. So you get the perspective of ancient humans as well, as they tell the stories of fighting the shaping sickness, where there was a belief that, hey, maybe we found the cure, but then they recognize that there is no cure. The flood determines when it wants to infect and when it doesn't. And so 1,000 or a good amount of humans, ancient humans, sacrificed themselves to stop the flood as much as they could, which gave the foreigners time to both, de-evolize humans and prepare for the flood, only to recognize that there was no cure. That was the thing, that they believed humanity found a cure. Humanity believed they found a cure, but humans were the ones to determine there is no cure. Like, the flood decides. And in fact, the reason why the flood didn't really interfere as much with humans at first was because it was the precursors. That's what the flood are. They are the precursors who want revenge on the foreigners. And humanity just happened to be caught up in the middle. Well, as time goes on, once again, and the main character is cognizant that time has gone. They're not just like thinking like it's only been a few days or hours. Like, they know it's been years, but again, they just don't have they don't have the ability to leave, and most of them don't want to leave. And what ends up happening is again, while the main character finally tries to pull her companions out and get them to get out of this shrouded area, maybe hoping that getting as far away from this area as possible would somehow release them from whatever they're in, Genjutsu. But as she's doing this, what ends up happening is Cortana arrives, and it causes a battle, and she gets knocked out, and her companions bring her back to this shrouded area. And then when they're still observing what's happening now with Cortana, and now the Banish arriving, they watch this fight go on. And in fact, a drop pod comes down, and out comes an elite who starts fighting these humans. But they don't call them elites. They'd call them Sangheli. They call them Saurian-faced beasts. They don't look at them as normal Banished or Covenant. They look at them from the lens of the ancient humans. It's very interesting read. But during this time, the ring obviously shatters and then goes into slip space. The shattering of the ring causes, of course, an explosion that sends a shockwave, throwing our main character down tunnel tube-like system. She had originally gone there to try and explore, but didn't find much, other than these weird motes of light that were forming something that says enemy within. And that's all she gets. But then when she's knocked down there once again, and instead of going, she only went down I think it was 800 meters because she had rope. But this time she falls all the way down along with the elite who dies upon impact, but somehow she lived. And when she's down there, she finds one of those ring structures that we see across Zeta Halo. Remember, they're on the exterior stone, but on the interior, Forerunner alloy. And when she looks into it, because it activates, she doesn't see what we would see, like the weird little data, and then we get a recording from Despondent Pyre, it's like she sees another world. And let me read to you what she says. So in it she sees a vast garden built upon foundations of stone, topped with blood-red flowers in teardrop-shaped white blossoms, separated by a twining stream between the columns, flowing in all directions, infinite in its beauty and complexity, endless. And then she says, and this is where it's important to me personally, I looked up and saw a brilliant flash of indigo light in the sky. No, it was a being of light, radiant, exquisite, terrifying, wondrous beyond my comprehension, and I heard its song as its winged form illuminated brighter, as if it were a star about to go nova. And then she kind of starts talking about like its purpose or intent. It felt like it was trying to communicate with her, but she couldn't understand it. And the only thing she could think of were the history that the ring had imparted to her earlier, enemy within. And so then she talks about that what she had discovered here was a transitory system or area. Because at the end of this, she says she goes into this light, to this weird world that she sees. And the last word she says is, I was on Zeta Halo, no longer. So again, that's kind of like the Cliff's Notes version spoiled, because again, there's just so much, and I will make a separate video talking about it in greater detail. But like, what does this mean? Does this mean in fact that, because let's be honest, this indigo bird-like thing that she sees is Abaddon. There's no doubt in my mind, because that's exactly how Abaddon is, explained in the encyclopedia. It's what Abaddon looks like in the encyclopedia. But the fact that Abaddon was trying to communicate, and it's like a weird, beautiful song, I don't know why, but it's kind of eerie to me. I think it's cool, but eerie. But at the same time, the ring itself is saying enemy within. Of course, foreigners don't perceive the endless as buddies. It knows what's in Zeta Halo. So then here we see this woman go from Zeta Halo to somewhere else, this beautiful place that feels endless, the endless. So here's my thing, here's what I'm trying to get at. This feels like it basically tells me that Abaddon has a presence on Zeta Halo. And to me, that connects to Edge of Dawn. Spoiler alert for Edge of Dawn if you haven't read it. But there is a part in Edge of Dawn where Joyeuse is watching Chief, and I believe it's when he's talking to Lucas Browning, the same combat medic who had been tortured by the Harbinger in the Infinite terminal logs, as well as in Rubicon Protocol. But in that moment, Joyeuse gets attacked by something that pervades into her systems and takes the Despondent Pyre control over the ring. And a lot of people have been debating what this entity was. One, people say it's the grave mine because of the tendrils, but the other, well, maybe not the other, but for me, I think it has to do more with Abaddon. Now, this doesn't confirm my theory, but the reason why I think it's the Abaddon is because it just feels like it makes more sense. It just feels like random just to throw in a grave mine here. But also because if you think about it, if Abaddon itself is an AI from the precursors, it's still in essence similar to that of the Flood, the grave mine, and the precursors. Again, I don't know if this confirms nor denies my theory, but what I'm trying to say here is this right here feels like Abaddon is on Zeta Halo in some capacity. I don't know if this story itself will have any major effect on the next game, but it raises some interesting thoughts. So yes, like I said, I'm gonna make a whole separate video on Ghosts of the Gyre because it's just very interesting, especially for what we do here on this channel, which is talking through all the books and the lore. So we will talk about that at length, in greater detail later on. That was just the Cliff Notes version. The next one's actually relatively short, and realistically, I think either way, if spoiler free or not, it's pretty much not something that I don't think a lot of Halo fans are gonna be freaked out if it's spoiled, because Bello Corsa is basically just another look at a different side of Halo. It follows a woman known as Bello Corsa, who is a motorsports driver participating in the Quezon 24-hour endurance race on the planet Reach in 2551. Now, what I really just like about this story is it's a heavy focus on that other side of the Halo universe. That side that isn't, at war with the Covenant. That isn't talking about the Banished or the Spartans or anything realistically that has to do with the games. It's just one aspect of the Halo universe you don't think about. Because right here, you have a heavy focus on AMG Dynamic Transport, who make the Warthog. You have Bella talking about past races and the ins and outs of the racing community. I think it's mostly just kind of a love letter in a way to the Forza Motorsports series, because, you know, our lovely Warthog has been in their games. This almost feels like a love letter to it. At the same time, I'm about 90% sure it's Jeff. I could be wrong. But someone at 343 was a big motorsports fan. I swear I remember seeing them post a lot on Twitter. I don't remember who it was. This was years ago. But I think it's just one big love letter to motorsports and the Forza community altogether, because it gives you just that aspect of Halo you don't think about. It just builds the world, kind of like Battleborn did, when you see those teens going to high school, going to concerts. Like, it just felt like that's what it was. And there's really just not much to spoil here, because it's just you learning about that aspect of their life. It's an interesting tell. I don't know if it'll ever go anywhere, but I think it's good. It's fun. Okay, so this one is super exciting for me to talk about, because it just felt weirdly coincidental with the past few books I just read and made videos on. This one is called London Calling. And in this one, you basically have it to where we are following Lorette Agrenia during the events of the Halo Infinite multiplayer trailer, where she's running through London in 2552 during the Battle of Earth. And right here we get to start off and see that Agrenia and her father are smuggling something for Oni. Her father, unfortunately, during their time of trying to run through, weren't expecting the Covenant to attack in the way they did, and it leads to her father being mortally wounded. He gives her both the package that they're supposed to be delivering, which he says himself, he would never work for Oni, but the person that they're supposed to be delivering for is basically an old friend. And like, he's the only reason he's doing this. So he gives her the package, and he also gives her the bee pendant, that pendant that we see her grab in the actual trailer. So then after she receives all this, you know, we kind of get a little bit more background of like why she does the things. Her and her father ran like their own little courier type business that was more smuggling and maybe not so, you know, happy to look upon by the authorities. But what you need to know is that Oni knew about them. Clearly they didn't really care nor do anything about that, because they're employing them right here to get this package to their person. And so then the rest of the story kind of plays out the same way, with Agrenia being, you know, chased around and trying to sneak through London that we see in the trailer. One little interesting aspect of this is we do see her get to like this garden area where she takes a moment to like breathe and recompose herself. And while she's doing this, she looks over and sees an elite. But the elite kind of makes like a shh sound or gesture before they're both attacked by a brute. And the brute, in fact, decides to attack the elite. And while she can't, you know, understand Sangheili, she could definitely tell that the brute was essentially saying something along the lines of, found you. And then it starts attacking brutally and viciously this elite, while Agrenia takes the moment to escape, wondering what the hell's going on, why are they fighting? We then cut back to the part where Agrenia is now hiding behind the Scorpion tank, sees a little group of brutes, and tries to sneak away before she accidentally hits some debris, causing her to be noticed. As she goes to run away, as we know, a drop pod lands right in front of her, and a Spartan comes out, nods at her, protects her from shots, as more, like 3 more Spartans come in and start fighting the Banished. Okay. Here's where it's crazy for me. After the battle, we see that Spartan like put a hand out to Agrenia and she accepts it. And that's where the trailer would go into Agrenia being escorted by these 4 Spartans, and then it would transition into present day where Agrenia is a Spartan, right? Here, instead of all that, we get greater detail of these Spartans. This first Spartan that held the hand out to Agrenia is a female Spartan. And after she confirms that both Agrenia and the package are okay, and Agrenia asks, how did you find me? They point to the bee pendant and say it's a tracker. And so basically her dad had made sure that they could track her. And this is where this female Spartan turns and looks at the injured Spartan, because one of them got injured, and you see it in the trailer. He's kind of like wobbling a little and needs help up by another Spartan. This Spartan turns to that injured one and says, are you okay, Dorian? Now, if you have not read the Battleborn series, or seen my videos on the Battleborn series, or know nothing about the Battleborn series, that means nothing to you. But for those who have read it, and for me who just read them recently and made videos, my mouth dropped. Because Dorian is one of the teens, who at the end of Meridian Divide has to determine, is he going to become a Spartan due to a genetic like morph of their genes, basically mean that they are they need to become Spartans in order to guarantee survival for the future. Okay, that's where the book ends. And so right here we see they did it. They're Spartans. Yes, they confirmed they were going to become them by the end of the book, but that was the last time we seen them. 2019 was the last update we got on these 4 teens who are now 22 years old and are Spartan 4s. So then we see the rest of the Spartans take Agrinia. They get to Waterloo, which is where their main objective was to get to. And they get there, and we find out that the leader, weirdly enough, and I'm a little hesitant on this one, is that the leader of this group, or at least of the 4, is Evie. Because when they report to their main officer, who's a sergeant actually, but when they report to this sergeant that they meet up with, he's, again, this is all from Agrinia's perspective. She assumes that Evie's the leader because this is the way she's commanding and leading. And even right here, this sergeant says, we're getting out of here, Spartan Rousseau, which is the name of Evie. I say it's weird because I always thought Saskia would become the leader if anyone was going to, but overall it's fine. And we see here that Dorian is a little annoyed that they're leaving, saying why are we leaving? The fight is here. This is where the sergeant basically is talking to them. And what's unique about the Spartan is he's wearing an exoskeleton armor. And what's cool is Igrinia says even here that the armor could almost be the same as the armor that the Spartans are wearing, but he's clearly not a Spartan. But then she talks about the mounted rocket on his shoulder, and this is where it basically confirms that this guy, this sergeant, is wearing Orion armor. The Orion armor that we've seen from the original Master Chief, the 1990 Macworld, the Orion armor that's become synonymous with MCC and Infinite. He's wearing an exosuit skeleton of that. So it's pretty cool. And he basically tells them that hey, we're getting out of here because, Oni wants it that way. He also opens up the package, and inside of it is a palm-sized box. And on it, or at the very least, Agrinia says that you could probably fit some sort of AI data chip in it. But on this box is the picture of a javelin. And I don't want to say what it is because I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but I don't want to say something and then people are you're wrong, blah, 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 and I get yelled at. I think that's something to do with rogue Spartans, but that's just me. But either way, this sergeant tells Dorian that the reason they're leaving is because this thing known as Ouroboros is underway, and all high authority personnel is being evac to an orc cloud. And so Dorian, of course, wants to protest, but, he gets put in his place as per usual, and they're told to get on board their ship, the Pale Horse. One final note that I'll actually note on Dorian is he injured his ankle, his left side. And the reason that's funny, because ironically enough, when they met Owen, who saved them in Meridian, he had his left leg injured. And Dorian had helped him at the very end of the book. So it's just kind of that ironic thing, that little, poetic telling. By the way, this sergeant looks to Agrinia and asks her name, and then she's Lorette Agrinia, my father only did this because apparently he knew and served with the man. The man says yep, I served with your father during Trebuchet, and that's the Operation Trebuchet was basically when they would fight the insurrectionists during the early times of the war. And this is where it gets interesting. The sergeant then looks to Agrinia and says, listen, you have 2 options. You could stay here and probably die, or you can come with us and also probably die. There's no guarantee of living on either one, but it's totally up to you. Agrinia says, I'd rather fight and do something, so I'm going to come with you. And he says, hey, that's the right choice. And so he takes off his helmet and he introduces himself to her, saying, my name is Sergeant Nolan Byrne. Now, if you don't remember who Nolan is, he's in Contact Harvest. He is the other sergeant that works with Sergeant Johnson. He was the other guy that was part of his team during Trebuchet who had gotten mad at Johnson and had fought them when they both went and served for the CMA on Harvest. They served together. They hated each other at the beginning of the book, but by the end of it, they had reconnected and became basically, war brothers and all that type of stuff. The fact that he's here in this Orion exosuit armor, kind of a love letter to Sergeant Johnson being in the Orion group, but also leading these Spartans, which he calls Deltas. He says they're, good job, Deltas. It's a weird mix, but I like it. And like I said in my spoiler-free version, I want more. Jeff And Alex, I won't do the same spill I did, but please, this is so interesting. Give me more of Nolan and my 4 favorite Spartans, please. The next story is known as Elrond, and this takes place about a month after Cortana dies, and when the created have pretty much lost control over the galaxy. What's really cool about this is it follows a squadron of 4 Saber pilots known as Kona. And there's Kona, or sorry, not 4, but 5. There are 5 groups known as Kona. Kona 1, 2, 5, and you start hearing Kona 1, Kona 2, Kona 3. The main group we follow is Kona 1, who has Hex and Blackjack as our main character. What I really loved about this story is it's pretty much Top Gun. Just the way that the military dialogue, doing all the pre-flight checks and all the conversations between the different pilots, it's cool. Each Kona has obviously 2 pilots, a main pilot and a co-pilot. And for ours is Hex and Blackjack. And they all fly sabers that we flew in Halo Reach. So think George and Noble 6. But the whole thing is it's so good. I felt like I was living a Halo version of Top Gun. And when I listened to Jeff Easterling's reading of it in the audio version, I could feel it. I could feel what Jeff was trying to execute in this, and it felt just like Top Gun in my honest opinion. This one's a little cool because are easier to talk about because they're part of this planetary defense platform protecting this planet known as Dormire 3. The Banished have arrived close in the system, and they pretty much surmise that the moon, which has been shattered near Dormire 3, is their goal, because after or during the rising of the Guardians, a Guardian awoken on this moon, left the moon, and now all these chunks of the moon are floating around. The planetary systems had to shoot parts of the moon to prevent it from hitting the planet. And so now they're expecting that the Banished are here because they want whatever's left inside this moon from the Guardian. So these Kona teams get in their ships and they fly out to engage with the Banished. When they get there, they're surprised to find a few different things. They find a few carve type vessels that the Banished use, but also a weird looking ship that is probably a high ranking ship, or at the very least has a high ranking leader aboard it. It's never said who's on there, but clearly they're here for a big reason. The Konas then engage with the Banished, fighting off phantoms and even reinforce spirits. And instead of troops being in those 2 forked arms, in fact, in each one, on one side is plasma cannons that are just, pouring into these Konas, or sabers, and the other side has mines. Only one of these ships is destroyed, which is Kona 4, who has Moonlight and Gazebo, while Kona 3, which has Samba and Candle in it, are more disabled. And Candle might be dead or just incapacitated, because even the main pilot, Samba, says that she can't, they can't get in contact with Candle. Because you're in a cockpit, you can't just, you did it back there? It's that type of situation where they can't tell. And things are not going great because there's a lot of Banished. And in fact, they get to the point where they destroy Kona 1, Hex and Blackjack Saber, but they're able to eject. Obviously, their suits are space worthy. They're able to get back together and basically tie themselves together to prevent themselves from, losing each other and dying alone or floating off in space, which I think would be absolute hell. But when they're thinking all hope is lost, during their fight, Phaetons come. 400 Phaetons. And at first they're thinking, crap, the Banished or the Created are here, even though we know Cortana and the Created are gone. But clearly something's causing the Phaetons to come to life, and we're cooked. Because one of these Phaetons comes towards both of Hex and Blackjack. But instead of killing them, it brings them aboard. And when Hex and Blackjack are inside of it, they can feel the interior of the ship changing. And even Hex says it right here that even though he can't understand the system, he can understand that it's clearly now a cockpit, allowing him to control the Phaeton. And you hear an AI in here, doesn't say which, I think it's just a normal Forerunner AI that says, Reclaimer, employ, protect. Basically meaning that these Phaetons are just now set to default Forerunner, technology. Humanities are the Reclaimer. We must protect and serve them. And so while now Hex is using his controls of the Phaeton to take on the Banished, Blackjack discovers, as again, once the co-pilot in this Phaeton, that he somehow now has control over all the other Phaetons from their Phaeton. And so they use this newfound army to turn the tide, attack the Banished, and this ship that has this high-ranking leader ends up just leaving, leaving the system, while a few stragglers made it down to the planet. So they round up the rest of Kona and prepare to take the fight to the ground with their newfound army. Now, once again, this kind of goes into that system of, I didn't know I needed this. I didn't know I needed a Top Gun-esque story from Halo, and I really wanted more. By the end of this story, I was like, no, that can't be it. Keep going, because this is fantastic. And hearing Jeff Easterling read it was even better. Like, I don't know, he cooked with it. It just felt like, it felt so much like an actual military science fiction book for a moment. Like, all Halos do, but I feel like the original books, like when they were under Tor and all that, really had that sense of military-esque, like, I don't know how to explain it. It just had that essence of it. Whereas the newer ones still have it to a degree, but this one just finally recaptured what I kind of missed from those books like The Cold Protocol and Contact Harvest. It just felt grounded. The next one is known as Worlds Uncharted, and this one takes place in 2557 in April of 2557, and it's basically a transmission from a mother to her daughter, where the mom talks about that she's part of the UEG's cartographic corps aboard the Hugin class survey ship known as Anjin. And what's interesting about this story is that, like, it's a story of a mom who is basically going out to survey the galaxy. You know, now that the war's over, they can re-explore. And they need to re-explore because they've lost so many planets from the Covenant. Aboard this ship is an AI known as Clavel. He's a non-volitional AI, aka not a smart AI. Then we have two Kig-Yar siblings known as Vix-Ta, a female, and Max-Ta, the brother. We never get the main character's name, but basically throughout this, she's just telling different stories of what's happened. She talks about how she wants to do this because she wants to help map out the regions of the galaxy to re-explore and be a part of this new chapter of humanity. On it, they find crazier things. For example, they find near a moon named Anrio, an old Covenant ship, like old pre-Covenant ship, where in fact, it's not Covenant, because the Kig-Yar tell a story of a Sanshayum naval commander who was mad that the War of Beginnings, the war that, you know, when it ended, it forged the Covenant. He was mad that it ended in peace. So he took his ship and disappeared. And right here, they might have just found that ship and even like a little settlement that might have been here once. But it's long abandoned and they can't find the Sanshayum commander. She then goes off to say other things, like she's discovering other planets that are in their primordial phase, but eventually will become similar to that of Earth or Reach. Coming across black holes that pulled them out of slip space and things are a little weird. Other planets that are very similar to Harvest. But this one was interesting because clearly it was a colony candidate in 2371, but was abandoned. And when they try to look up any colonial registry about it, it's like it's all been wiped clean. And she even says that something about this planet makes it feel like they stumbled across a crime scene. At one point, they go through a dark nebula, which are like, if you don't know what nebula is, it's basically like the nursery place for newborn stars. And so a dark version of that is similar, but in the fact that it basically prevents light from getting in. So when you're inside of a dark nebula, it's like pitch black. And things start going weird. Like the ship loses power. I think it's Max-Ta, the brother Kig-Yar, says he's like seeing figures and stuff and like shadows being like moving around. So to the point that he freaks out that he hides in his room. When they eventually get out of this dark nebula, like the ship power comes back and they go about their day, but they use their systems to scan the area they were just in and come to find out their system says there's no stellar activity, which means that this dark nebula isn't really like doing a normal nebula thing. Because in it, there should be stellar activity. There should be stars that are being like formed and born, but there was none to be detected. At one point, they stop at a trading post to make some modifications to the ship. The Kig-Yar only knew about it and told her that if she said anything about it, you know. At one point, they show a cosmic vampire to the main character, the Kig-Yar do at least. And what this is it's basically a white dwarf that's settled between two binary stars and is like consuming all of their solar energy and all that kind of stuff. And I guess that this type of phenomenon is rare, but it's grounded in Kig-Yar mythology. And it's a sign, but like just by showing her, is a sign of their trust and friendship for her, that she's like, this is when it's weird with this main character because she seems like she just doesn't care, because when that happens, it shows that they trust her and she's happy. But even when she was like threatened by the Kygar, if she revealed that they had made a pit stop at this trading post, she was like, this is when I realized that the Kygar were more than just what they were, than scavengers and pirates. They're explorers. And it's like, you're kind of crazy. Then they come across, which is kind of funny in here, they come across a cryopod, and within it is a man with a 3-legged dog. Now, I'll be honest, our next book along our normal journey is First Strike. I have read First Strike. I have not read any of the adjunct stuff at the end, all the extra stories. And apparently this is a story that's in one of those. And I guess this is kind of like almost a conclusion. They can't pull him out of cryo with his dog, because if they do, they don't have the technology to do it well and keep him alive. So for now, he's still in cryo. And when they get back to, human controlled space, they'll address it. But it was just kind of a fun little nod to First Strike, which was weird because that's the next book. So then this is where the mother basically ends her stories, and she tells her daughter that, like, that's all for now. I'm going to be returning in a couple months on August 3rd at the new Phoenix spaceport. But for now, I need to talk to your father. So then the next little transmission is to the father, aka this main character's husband, where she basically just reveals that, like, she needs to be a part of this next chapter for humanity, and that her and him have known that this relationship wasn't working, that by having a daughter, it didn't save anything, and in fact, it just made her an asshole to another human being. But she basically reveals that this next time she's back home will be her last, and that she's sorry, but like she cannot stay. She has to go and explore. Like this is where her passion lies. And then she basically says, like, I'll continue to make these like little data entries for our daughter unless you think they're doing more harm than good, then I'll stop. But overall, like, after this, I'm leaving. She's like, I love you and I always will love you, but this is just what has to be. And then she says, I'll see you soon. Now, I revealed in my spoiler-free version that this story made me depressed, and here's the reason why. If you know anything about New Phoenix and what happens in July, you know that by the time that this mom gets home, more than likely, especially given how this story like is leading to, she's not going to see her child or husband ever again. Because in July, just a few weeks before this mom gets back, the Didact comes with the composer and composes pretty much all of New Phoenix. And that's what was so depressing about this story, is that, like, it's kind of a Halsey moment. Think about it. Halsey gave up Miranda to Jacob because she knew she'd be a terrible mom. And she knew that Miranda was in better hands with Keys than herself. But then what ultimately happens is this. Keys dies, and then Miranda dies. And now the woman who thought she was doing the right thing, which in a way, yes, they're doing the right thing. I'm not saying that they were wrong, but who kind of put their own selfish needs in like a priority over them, their family, still ends up losing everything. Because when this mom gets home, her daughter and husband are dead. Just like with Halsey, who eventually we'll find out, spoiler alert, in Glasslands, I believe it was, that both Miranda and Jacob are dead. I'm sure by now she knows Jacob is, but I'm sure she doesn't find out about Miranda until Glasslands. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure I remember this part. The next story is known as First Reign, and now First Reign takes place in 2560, and it starts off with Sloane talking about, basically, I'm just calling it Operation Firewall. He doesn't say Operation, he just says Firewall, but basically talking about how the first executor has been made, and it worked. He then talks about how they're aboard this ship known as Long Reverends. And when he means them, he means him and other, what they call info life. And that's what they're calling AIs and the created. They're not calling them AIs, they're calling them info lives. And he says that, him and a few of his info life siblings are aboard this ship, but it's heavily damaged and they can't access all the systems. So they need to figure out a way how to get to all their info life siblings and bring them to this ship so that they can together control it, fix it, and basically make it their home base. But the way to do that is with the executor. So then it switches the perspective to one of these AIs known as Proxy, who talks to one of these executors. And Proxy basically starts revealing like this planet that they're going to, known as Illyria, who due to corporate greed and all that kind of stuff has botched a lot of terraforming jobs. And in fact, the star within the system has pretty much been unstable, causing for basically the heat on the planet to rise, to the point where this planet that was once bountiful for like agriculture and all that is now in a severe drought, and the temperature continues to rise every year to the point that life on this planet is almost impossible. So they have a plan. On this planet, there are these courier guilds who basically have control of any slip space capable vessel on this planet. And this basically means that since this planet now needs a large amount of importers to bring food and all this kind of stuff, water, to Illyria, these courier guilds now are, in essence, the government. They have control of the economy. They are the representatives of this planet. So Proxy comes and talks with these guild members, and you get like their names and which guild they're part of. And Proxy says, hey, I can bring these foreigner orbital platform systems that foreigners use to deal with, unstable stars. And what these will do is it will fix the star's instability, and it will allow for your weather systems to start working properly. Meaning, I can bring rain back to this planet that has not seen rain in 100 years. And everyone in this group are like, okay, well, what do you want in return? Because that's a miracle, basically. But there's got to be a catch. And so Proxy says, I just want 1%. And everyone's like, oh, 1% of profits is like, that's very reasonable. Matter of fact, that's a steal in my opinion. But this is where Proxy goes, oh, no, not 1% of your profits. We don't need money. We meant 1% of your population. And so then they're all like, well, what do you need 1% of our population for? And that's when Proxy starts talking about the way she's even in this room is because one of these executors is standing there and she's projected on its palm like Joyeuse does with Chief in Infinite. But this executor has not said anything. It's just been standing there, almost lifeless. She says, this is an executor. He is the perfect blend of man and machine. Basically, it's a person inside armor, like a Spartan, but instead of the person being in control, the AI is in control. And we've seen this with the Halo Infinite drops with the Chimera stuff. So think, Chimeras. That's what these are. And that's why they came here, because they want humans so that they can make them into these Chimeras. I'm just going to say Chimera from now on because it's so much easier. I don't know why I'm having such a problem with the executor. Yeah, so then everyone in the room's kind of like, okay, well, we need to debate this. So then they do. It switches into like a debate where you change perspectives of who's talking. But for the most part, only one person brings up the morality of the issue and they're quickly shut down. Like, listen, we're not going to talk about the morality of this. We need this. So the discussion isn't even about whether they should do it or whether it's right or wrong. It's about how do we do it? Because one, they haven't taken a census in 35 years. So 1% of their entire population is not something they really know right now. And two, they need to figure out who do they pick and how do they pick. After which they determine this. This is their end plan. For the first few months, they will give off 5 people, which they start saying from people, they switch to units. So they immediately just take away humanity from these people, saying, we'll give you 5 units every month until we can determine what the exact number 1% would be. If after 6 months we cannot determine that still, we will then up the subscription to 10 units per month until again we can determine that number. Proxy agrees because she understands that their entire system of governments and everything is still really unstable, that it's a reasonable request. The second part is they determine, hey, who's going? They're like, well, first, immediate families of these courier guild representatives are off limits. The other people that are off limits are essentials, people who are like engineers, who are part of the next generation, not completely, not all young people, but a certain degree of young people are not allowed to go. And doctors, medics, all that kind of stuff. And then they say the first to go should be those that are just deemed unsocial, like people who are just not useful to society. And everyone agrees. Proxy agrees. And she immediately sends the platforms in. And she's like, within a few weeks, you will see immediate change of this planet. We then switch perspectives to a little girl named Amelia Chicondi. And she's running around playing with her doll, or her action figure, I guess, that she calls Mr. 17 because on its chest it says 17. Clearly something else was here, but it got scratched off. We can clearly know that this is a figure of Master Chief. But she doesn't know that. She just knows he's Mr. 17 and he was a Spartan. That's all she knows. Anyways, she's playing with her toy, but she's also reflecting on she cannot find her brother. he went missing 2 weeks ago, and he's right at the age where he can start working and be an adult, but he's gone. And she talks about how her parents like don't really answer her, but they constantly do cry at night. And so it's kind of like, I'm assuming the parents knew what happened. But then she's like, oh, the little girl to herself, as you know, her POV says, oh, I'll probably see my brother on this certain day because today's supposed to be a special day because everyone's going to be outside for something that's going to happen. So she goes outside. There's a lot of people, a lot of the population are there waiting, looking up at the sky that's getting cloudy. And also there are 9 chimeras. And even the little girl looks up and goes, they look like Mr. 17, but something about them is unsettling because they're still machine really, because they're just very like still and formal, like nothing about them seems human at all. And then it starts to rain. And the little girl like is excited, but at the same time she's sad because she couldn't find her brother. But then she looks at one of these chimeras and she feels even sadder for it because she goes, this poor chimera will never feel the first rain. Like who was ever in the armor will never feel the first rain to hit Illyria in 100 years. And that's depressing for multiple reasons because more than likely, I mean, it probably isn't that particular one, but in fact, one of those chimeras is her brother. And in fact, will never feel that rain. And she doesn't know it. She feels bad for her brother because he's gone, but she feels bad for this chimera because he can't feel the rain. When in reality, they're one and the same. That ending was a gut punch. And honestly, I need to know now, like, from your perspective, and I said this in my spoiler-free version, from your perspective, which is worse? Is it worse that Halsey and, you know, Oni kidnapped children and turned them into Spartans? Or is it worse that this group barely even considered like the morality of trading humans to fix their planet's or the star system's instability? And because they're doing it every month, and they will continue to do it every month until they either rebel or something else happens. Like, I get it, don't worry, I'm not trying to defend Oni and Halsey, even though I kind of am, because I like Halsey. But this just is terrible, because at least, the very least, these kids, very lightly, remain some autonomy. Some, ever so slightly. But these chimeras lose everything for good. So that's realistically where I want to end that one. Like, it's a really good story. It's interesting. I'm curious to see the implications for the lore, because you have to remember, if they're giving off 5 people, because they did determine that a rough estimate of 1% of the population is maybe close to tens of thousands of people. So if they start to get to that number, that means there's going to be tens of thousands of chimeras running around. That's probably way more than there are Spartans at this point. And that is a huge lore implication. So I'm very curious to see how they go about that. So the next story is known as Axios, and this takes place aboard the UNSC Infinity in December of 2559. It's about Lasky, who is sitting in his captain's office, and he's awaiting a transmission from someone. And he's also looking at his chessboard. And remember, Lasky in Forward Unto Dawn had his cool little chessboard that he played with, and oftentimes would listen to his brother's recordings and move his pieces in particular to what his brother says. And right here, like, we find out that he hasn't watched these recordings since Forward Unto Dawn. Because one, he lost them, but when he did get them back, because Sully, remember Sully from Forward Unto Dawn, then joins Oni and is in like Hunt the Truth and all that kind of stuff and is pretty much a sketchy person now. Sully was able to recover them and sends them to Lasky. But Lasky still cannot bring himself to watch them because he didn't feel worthy to watch them. He didn't feel worthy to look at his brother. And he finally does. He's listening to one of Cadman Lasky's recordings. And while he's listening to it, he's reflecting on the fact that Thomas Lasky, is now a 50-year-old man. He's double the age his brother ever could have made it to. And then he reflects on his time at Corbeilo Academy and pulls out dog tags of those who died. Cadman Lasky, Dima, and everyone. Everyone who was on Corbeilo Academy that died. Plus, he has more dog tags of those he's lost along the way to this point in time. And he's just kind of like in this really down moment. Like, you can tell Lasky's hurting. But then Roland says that, like, hey, transmission's coming in from Circinius 4. And if you don't remember what planet that is the planet where Corbeilo Academy was on. And the last time we ever seen it, at the very least in our journey, was when it was glassed and attacked by the Covenant in both Forward Unto Dawn and briefly mentioned in Oblivion. So then Lasky accepts the transmission, and immediately a 90-year-old woman who's in full military garb pops up, screaming a chess move to Lasky. And we are, shown that this is Lasky's 90-year-old mother. Now, if you don't remember in Forward Unto Dawn, Lasky and his mom don't really have a great relationship. His mom's very much into the military life. Like, she is military. And when Cadman died, she sent Lasky a very just formal and non-human basically informing him his brother's dead. But it's not human. She's like, I'm here to inform you that your brother Cadman Lasky, blah blah blah, died. Like, you can see it when Lasky's looking at his mom that she doesn't even have a human emotion to the fact that her son died. And that hurts Lasky, and it goes to show that him and his mom don't have a good relationship. But then right here, that good relationship exists, and they start talking about how they've both been, and you can tell that it's lighthearted. And she informs him that they're deglassing Cersenius 4 and that Corbulo Academy will actually reopen in a few years. She then goes on to talk about how she found Colonel Kennedy Lynn McAfee's office, who was the woman that had admonished Lasky quite a few times and said that she knew Lasky's mom. And you can see that that connection was actually a lot stronger, because even for right here, Lasky's mother, when talking about Colonel McAfee, kind of has it to where she is starting to show a little bit of human emotion. Maybe she has softened up over the years that this was a longtime friend of hers and they had a retirement plan together, but now obviously McAfee died in Forward Unto Dawn. And that future is gone too, and that's where you can kind of see a break in Lasky's mother's stoicism. But then here again, Lasky's kind of he's in a rock and a hard place. He talks about in the beginning how they're going through logistics, resources, missions that they need to do, everything, and he's in this moment where he feels trapped and he doesn't know the next move. But his mom right here repeats her chess move. And so then Lasky looks at their chessboard and you realize that they're doing what him and his brother did. They're playing chess over these transmissions where they'll say a move, they'll make the move, and then they'll probably stop talking, and then they'll both think on what to do next, and the next time they talk, they'll move, right? And Lasky looks and sees he's been put in check. But his mom's like, don't move your piece just yet. And he's like, why? And she's like, I want you to really look at it. Think about your next move, because you are in a really difficult place. But I know that the next time I talk to you, you'll figure it out. And I want you to tell me how you did it. Not talking about chess. She's talking about his actual situation. He is the captain of the Infinity. The Infinity is the mothership of the UNSC. He is, in essence, the leader of the military. Not the full leader like FleetCom, but everyone's looking to him right now because of the decisions he has to make. And it's right here his mom's telling him, you're in a hard place, but you're a Lasky. Think about what you need to do and you'll figure it out. And she says Axios and ends the transmission, and he repeats Axios. He then thinks about the mantra of Axios and thinks about how when he was younger, Colonel Black talked to him about it. Well, not really talked, but lectured him on it. About how Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo had fallen on his sword because the Emperor Nero told him to, screaming Axios, I am worthy. And Lasky says as a kid, he didn't understand it. He thought it was just some dumb mantra. He just thought it was probably an order. But now he's realizing the older he is, it's not an order or just a mantra. It's a promise. And it's a promise him and his family, the Laskys, have given that they are going to fulfill. They are worthy. And at that moment, that Lasky kind of gets this pep in his step. Roland comes in and says, yo, Spartan Palmer, Blue Team, Spartan Locke, and Halsey are waiting for you. Halsey has a plan. And Lasky gets up and says, we got a galaxy to save. And it ends there. Now, I will say, for me personally, I really wanted a story of Lasky during the events of Infinite because I miss him and I need him back. But what we ended up getting from this was a lot more than what I could have expected. And honestly, I think I really love this story. Especially listening to Darren O'Hare, the voice of Lasky, tell it in the audio version. He just once again kills the roles of Lasky. And he just reinforces my love for the character. For those who don't know, outside of the obvious Chief and Fred and all that kind of stuff, Lasky is my undoubtedly favorite character from Halo. And so you have it to this point where Lasky himself is just down on his luck, but he speaks with his mother. He reminisces about Forward Unto Dawn and all these things that have built him up from that young kid who was insubordinate, did not care, are now culminating into this high-class captain of the UNSC Infinity. It's crazy to think that this kid who was just, I don't care about military command, I don't care about order, I'm just blah, 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 to who he is now. And I just think that bringing his mom back and showing that over the years that they have finally developed that relationship was really good. And I just really enjoyed Axios altogether. These last two are going to be weird. Honestly, if you've seen my other video, I'm not going to go over connectivity because once again, it's just a poem from Halo Evolutions that was also in that book. It's just part 2 of it where it's now, instead of a poem being about Chief and Cortana's relationship, it's about Chief and Joyeus's. So I'm actually just going to clip that one in here because it's realistically the same thing. There's just nothing to spoil or divulge into. But I will talk about Graveworld. And Graveworld's a short story, but its implications are interesting. So it takes place in 2560 in unknown space. And it starts off with the POV of this warrior explaining that he's looking at the setting sun on this broken world. And he's able to see monolithic structures and patches of the night sky through this world's dome that is fractured. And then the warrior goes on to talk about how this place once had a great war, but now it's silent. And now it's just memories. And he talks about how the others had fled, fearing the Didact's Hand's plan, which would lead to their immolation. But this warrior, known as Ren Alun, and a few of his other warriors stayed behind. He then looks to his hand. And for those who don't know, Ren Alun is an elite. But he looks to his hand, and it's no longer like a normal elite hand. It is a Forerunner arm with Forerunner alloy and hard light that could be readjusted at will. And he talks about how the faithful knew that the true transcendence didn't come from Halo as the prophets led them to believe, but in reality through sublimation to attain a new divine form in this warrior's keep. And then the story ends with Ren saying this: through fire and flesh and steel and blood, now and forever, Requiem was their home. So here's where I'm trying to, here's where this is crazy. And obviously, you know, Requiem is home. The last time we see Requiem in the lore is at the end of Spartan Ops when it's falling into a sun and that sun explodes. So I'm sitting here going, how? How is Requiem around still? Clearly it says that there's holes in the dome. So it's clearly like fractured and, damaged. But when you fall into a sun and explode, as it did in Spartan Ops, there's just no possible way that thing survived. Until me and another member of the community, Covey Cannon, talked about it. And I had thought about this too, and he just reinforced the idea in my head. We do know that Halo rings, when they're in a stage that could destroy them, go into emergency slip space. So what if in reality, Requiem didn't just crash into the sun and explode, but in reality, right when it was going into the sun, that explosion wasn't the planet hitting the sun. That explosion was it going into slip space and causing the instability of the sun with slip space to blow up. And so that's how Requiem survived. Clearly still damaged, because we have it to where elites are living on it. It never clearly states whether their full body is alloy. My assumption would be, based off the true transcendence, is to become a new divine form. So my assumption is yes, all these elites are now some sort of Promethean-esque design. I don't know if they're Promethean knights or soldiers or something else. It doesn't say. But they are some sort of Forerunner alloy. And it's a very interesting story, because you just brought back Requiem and made some of those cool little concept art from Halo 5 where we see half elite, half Prometheans a reality. Now, the last one is known as Connectivity Part 2. And to be so honest with you, there's really nothing here to spoil. Like, if you have read Halo Evolutions, there is a very quick poem in here called Connectivity. And it's exactly what that is. It's a poem about the Master Chief and Cortana. Now, if you put 2 and 2 together, Connectivity Part 2 in this book is merely just that poem, but now about Master Chief and Joyeuse. I mean, it's a poem, so it's really good, but I liked it. I think there's nothing to spoil here. It's just really talking about them too, like who they are, what they're doing, and just building that that connection of how they got here, why they're here, and how now they are together through it all, thick and thin. And that's pretty much it. That is the spoiler version. And like I said, if I could have gone more into Ghost of the Gyre, I would have, but already this is a long video just briefly talking about these 10 stories. But yeah, these 10 stories were phenomenally well done. A couple of them, like Rendezvous with Ramen and Bella Corsa, I think were cool, small little things that just add to the universe. But things like, London is Falling, Ghost of the Gyre, Grave World, First Reign really set up some interesting stories that I think could have major lore implications for the future of Halo games, but more than likely some of them will only be followed up with in future books, which in my opinion is fine because I'm a book guy. They're going to be very much like these. They're just going to build the universe, but they're not going to step over the toes of what's to come. You're not going to read this and have any questions answered to the future of Halo. You might have theories you can formulate, which is always great. I think that I'm curious to see how Hidden Xperia and Installation 00 talk about some of these stories. But what I will say is this: go into this just, not that one, go into Waypoint Chronicles expecting just to read more expanded lore about the Halo universe that will allow you to create theories, but also just to even see the different parts of the Halo universe you probably weren't expecting to even think about. And I think that largely what this book is trying to do is it's trying to expand and also capitalize on some of those stories in the past that basically making a full-blown game to focus on just wouldn't make sense or would take up too much time, that they can easily be addressed here while also still giving credence to everything that came before. Overall, I think Waypoint Chronicles is a great addition to these, chronicle books that we have, these short stories. I think it does exactly what these did to succeed. And I think that honestly, a lot of the stories in here have by far some of my favorite stories compared to these two. I will get more into these in the future, I pinky promise. But overall, as another set in just short stories in the Halo universe, Halo Waypoint Chronicles does a great job. There's some stories in there that I think a lot of fans will really love, and there's a lot of stories in there that I think fans will be like, whatever. But what's great about it is there's a story in here for everyone, whether you're a longtime fan or a new fan. But I will say this, most people who are going to enjoy this are going to be those deeper lore fans. A lot of the stories in here are going off pre-established stories. There's only a few that are kind of set in their own storyline that you don't need to understand any of the past games or books to read. But a lot of them really, rely on previous information, which is fine because these are specifically for people who just want to expand the universe. If you're looking just to start learning about Halo books or Halo universe, I'd recommend starting off with the actual books, not the, chronicles. You can also watch my videos as I go through them in order. That isn't to say that if you are a new fan, you shouldn't read it. I think you can read it. And honestly, I think that if you do read it as a new fan, you're going to be confused with a lot of it. But when you go and play the games or you go and read the other books, you're going to be like, hey, I read about that in Waypoint Chronicles. That's cool. And that's what this story really does. And I think that whether you're new or old, you'll enjoy it. But my sole conclusion is this. If you're new, you're not going to understand as much. If you're an old fan, you're going to understand a little too much. And if you're crazy like I am, you're going to be theorizing every last detail. But yeah, I'm curious to see what they do with these stories, but I'm also curious to hear about your own thoughts and feelings on this. But that is it for this video. Halo Waypoint Chronicles had a lot of great stories, not just these 10, but the other 25 as well. Let me know what your favorite is from Halo Waypoint Chronicles, and I will see you in Halo First Strike.